The primary purpose of this chapter is to provide an overview of some of the basic physiological adaptations that occur with exercise training. Adaptations range from those that take place in the early phase of training to those that take place with long-term training to those that take place over years. The majority of research has typically studied early to intermediate phase of training, ranging from 4 to 24 weeks. The number of long-term training studies is limited due to the cost and demanding logistics of such investigations. Insights into the physical potential of long-term training gained through cross-sectional studies allow comparison between highly trained athletes and untrained individuals. However, the role of genetic predisposition in such studies is hard to separate from the actual potential for training adaptations in such studies. In a classic study on the muscle adaptations to heavy resistance exercise, Sharon et al. Showed that the quality of muscle proteins, myosin ATPase, myosin heavy chains, can change after only several workouts. Adaptations to exercise starts with the first training session, progresses with each subsequent workout, and is specific to the training stimuli and genetic potential for change. The basis of any adaptation is the exercise stimulus created by the workout. The quality of the exercise stimulus is subject to the principles of specificity, intensity, frequency, and variation. How the workout is designed and changed over time dictates the success in achieving a targeted training goal. 1 RM strength, maximal oxygen consumption, or maximal power output. There are a host of different variables that must be considered and ultimately manipulated when designing training programs for different physiological systems, cardiovascular, muscle. The training level of the individual must be carefully considered when developing the exercise stimulus for the program. The upper limit of an individual's genetic potential dictates the absolute magnitude of the training adaptation. The magnitude of change also depends, however, on how much adaptational potential the person undergoing training has, that is, how much adaptation has already occurred within his or her physiological system. Each adaptation has an upper limit, and as an athlete gets closer to that upper limit, smaller and smaller gains are observed. For example, in some elite competitions, swimming, small gains in performance may be the difference between gold medal and 26th place. Thus, in an event where tenths or hundredths of a second make a big difference, it may be worth an extra training gain for that 0.05 improvement in performance. Because of the small gains possible with training in elite athletes, careful program design and monitoring become even more critical. It must be acknowledged that to make such gains, more and more time and smarter training programs must be undertaken to fine-tune a specific sport performance capability. At the top levels of competition, the observation that part-time athletes just do not exist supports the notion that improving and maintaining high level of athletic performance requires full-time attention. Here is where the difference between health, fitness, and sport performance training time commitment dramatically differ. Interestingly, for most athletes, sports performance involves the fitness of more than one physiological system. Thus, training involves the careful integration of several different targeting physiological systems. Performance gains in many sports typically are related to the changes in more than one physiological system. Total conditioning, i.e. training all the different components of sport fitness such as muscle strength and power, cardiovascular endurance, flexibility, coordination, speed, etc., address this need to train each of the physiological systems in a carefully balanced as needed for specific sport performance. In addition, an athlete has to be careful not to train one system, cardiovascular, at the expense of another, neuromuscular. If the latter is the main contributor to a targeted training goal, power output, this leads to the concept of compatibility of training programs when a total conditioning program is used. If high-intensity aerobic training diminishes the gains made in muscular power in a basketball player who needs power for jumping, alterations in the cardiovascular training program must be reevaluated to determine why the system is being trained. To burn calories and help the body composition, and changed, use cross-training or reduce the volume of aerobic endurance training. Performance gains typically are related to changes in more than one physiological system. The training program must train each physiological system and carefully balanced with specific performance goals in mind. In short, each athlete brings to a strength and conditioning training program his or her own genetic predisposition, potential for improvement, and willingness to put forth the effort required for developing his or her physiological potential. It is important to note to not underestimate the effort and discipline required. In addition, the training program must offer the appropriate exercise stimulus. Too often, sport coaches today are not even concerned with the specifics of training program, or do not even care what it is, because they have brought into a dangerous concept of the strength and conditioning specialist only needs to be a good motivator for any program to give results. This philosophically alarming concept flies in the face of training specificity. The concept of work hardening integrates the physiological and psychological aspects of strength and conditioning for sports. If the athlete has not been involved in any prior training program, positive changes are initially observed with almost any training program, owing to the athlete's large adaptational window. If continued changes are desired, however, that is for most elite athletes. Once training adaptations have used up a large portion of the adaptational window, the specificity of the training stimulus becomes even more paramount. Adaptational changes to a training program are dynamic and related to an athlete's age and stage of physical development. Furthermore, training programs that are unable to elicit an adequate stimulus for change in a particular physiological system can be ineffective. From a physiological perspective, it is much easier for elite athletes to maintain a performance level with a training than to improve in an area that is already using a high proportion of their genetic adaptational potential. This is especially true when improvement is desired over short periods of training. Younger athletes too often seesaw through a cycle of training and detraining, never really seeing progression increases in their adaptational beyond those of physical growth and maturity. This is most often due to the lack of periodization training plans for the athlete's career. Key concepts of physiological adaptations to exercise training. A number of important concepts about physiological adaptations to exercise training need to be understood. 1. Each person responds a little differently to each training program. Ultimately, an individualized training program is needed to address the specific needs and responses of the athlete. 2. The magnitude of the physiological or performance gain is related to the size of an athlete's adaptational window, genetic ceiling for change. 3. The amount of physiological adaptation depends on the effectiveness of the exercise prescription used in the training program. Exercise training programs need to change and provide variation to keep the exercise stimulus effective in eliciting positive changes or maintaining sport fitness. 4. Training for peak athletic performance is different from training for optimal health and fitness, because in the former, the level of adaptation usually requires considerably higher training intensities, frequencies, and volumes of exercise than needed for general health and fitness. Careful balance is needed in this exercise prescriptions to integrate the different types of training in a total conditioning program. 5. There is a psychological component to training, and this must not be forgotten, as each individual responds differently to a given physical stress.